Hello, and welcome to another edition of NAIC Insight Series. I'm your host, Bob Greene, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Derek Jones, Vice Chairman, Private Equity Investments, GCM Grosvenor. Welcome, Derek.
Thanks, Bob. And I want to begin by just saying how much I respect you, your leadership, and all that NAIC has done in the past, is doing currently, and the initiatives that you have in the future. Thank you very much. It's an honor and privilege to be interviewed by you.
Well, I appreciate that and have been looking for this discussion for a while. So why don't we go ahead and jump in? Tell us what it's like and what your responsibilities are as Vice Chairman of GCM Grosvenor.
Sure. Well, for the few people who may not know what Grosvenor is a large alternative asset management platform where we make alternative investments on behalf of our clients. We're typically allocating capital to private equity managers and hedge fund managers who then in turn take our capital and invest it directly into companies pursuant to their strategies. So we have 76 billion in AUM. About 2/3 of that is in our private markets practice, which is where I sit. Private equity, all strategies, venture, growth, buyout. We have a real estate vertical, an infrastructure vertical, a co-investment vertical, a secondaries vertical, and a private credit vertical. The other third is in our multi-strategy or more liquid strategies. We've been around 52 years, believe it or not. We have over 500 employees, and we are particularly known for our work with identifying the next generation of managers, that's small and emerging managers. And as a subset of that, I started a practice 17 years ago, which is focused on allocating capital to women and people of color. And that's my main responsibility. I also sit on the investment committee and other leadership committees of the firm.
Well, Derek, that answer really does present you for who you are, which is you happen to be a person that has probably over the last 15 years engaged with more diverse managers in private equity than anyone in the country. What have you learned over time about diverse managers themselves, but also how they engage in the role they play in the market?
Well, what I've learned and what we have demonstrated over close to 20 years of investing in over 250 transactions, we've allocated over $10 billion behind these diverse managers, is that they perform. They perform not only at a median level, they outperform. And one of the statistics that I'm most proud of is that over the last 3 years, 46% of Grosvenor's entire primary private equity allocations are going to managers who happen to be diverse. There is an intense desire for these managers to succeed for obvious reasons. There's very little room for mediocrity with diverse managers. If you're a woman coming into our office and trying to raise a $500 million fund credibly, you've been successful at every phase of your career because you've had to be. That's the history of the country. And so I've learned a lot. We can unpack that later, but that's a kind of a quick answer to your question.
Yeah, let me double click on that. I'm going to assume that you agree with me that unfortunately, not every LP or others, consultants, start from a place where they believe diverse managers outperform, or that they see diverse managers as this extraordinarily untapped opportunity. Why do you think after all these years, Derek, we still have trouble breaking through around the thought that diverse managers are outstanding performers?
You know, it's you and I, Bob, have had this conversation for 20 years.
Yeah, we have.
Unfortunately, I don't mean to make light of it, we're at the same place.
Yeah.
Incumbency is hard.
Yeah.
Change is hard. And this pernicious myth that when you allocate to women, even if I have the performance draped around my head, if you allocate to women or people of color, you're somehow compromising the return potential. And that is just simply not true. It's not true with the studies that NAIC has done. It's not true with our performance over 17 years. It's not true with many studies, the NIGHT study. And it is very frustrating But it's hard to change perception. And that's, if there's one thing that I wish I could change, it is that very perception that you are compromising by allocating to someone who's different.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that you're right, Derek. We have had the conversation 20 years. You're also right. Unfortunately, it hasn't changed a lot, but it's motivating and encouraging to see how diverse managers have scaled. I'll give the audience a sense of context. I first met you, Derek, at an NAIC conference in 2001, and for those that think I founded the NAIC. I want to let people know you were there when I arrived on the shores of NAIC. You were already the chair. I'm sorry, you were already the treasurer of the board of directors. So you've had a long time in service to the organization. But I think when we met, Derek, the largest fund in the industry at that time was a $750 million fund named TSG. And for an industry now that has $100 billion funds, that's pretty extraordinary. What would you attribute some of the success and the transformation in scale to over these many years?
Well, when I look at the established diverse managers, they have a lot of attributes in common. One is a very crisp strategy. When we started our practice, our first investment was behind Robert Smith in his first institutional fund. Mission critical software. It was a brilliant strategy, one that was somewhat unique, and they have stuck to it. When we look at Clearlake, we were in their early funds, a very flexible across the capital structure with the focus on 2 or 3 sectors. Sycamore, a terrific focus on retail and consumer. And so it starts with the strategy that's somewhat differentiated and building an ecosystem, a set of consultants and operators around that strategy to execute. And then we go to the wheelhouse. What is it? What's a Vista deal? What's a Cirrus deal? What's a Sycamore deal? What's a Vistria deal? These are all established managers, and they know very clearly, and it's how they drive their organization, what is the type of deal that they want to do. I found that these personalities, these people who have started these firms, have a intense desire to be best of class in all facets of their business, not only on the investment front, but on the compliance front, on how they communicate with LPs, reporting, distribution, portfolio construction, really the business of running the business. In the old days, you just had to be a good investor. You buy low and sell high. Today, you have to be a good fund manager, and there's more complexity to that. The SEC is involved in that. You deal with how to manage between your gross and your net spread. Do you borrow for capital calls, et cetera? And so that's another area that they have in common. I think also having a strong culture is one that I see with these established diverse managers who've been able to scale widely. Homegrown training, a great sense of how they want their professionals to learn and execute on deals that, again, fit in their wheelhouse and then are a part of their strategy. And so I've been impressed and delighted to see, and we've been fortunate in our practice that we have been early and impactful with most of the managers that are diverse who have now scaled and are considered established diverse managers.
Derek, I mean, just the number of things you just said in that statement, being an investor in Vista One and, being a significant investor in Clearlake and Sycamore and these other funds. I mean, the numbers are extraordinary that you share, but the context, when you provide the names of the firms and, what you've learned from the founders is just phenomenal. So kudos to you and your team at GCM Grosvenor. It's most impressive. And I look forward to exploring more. But now I want to move on a bit, Derek, because believe it or not, what we just discussed is the part of you that most people know, right? It's the part of you that they could probably read on the website or they could read, throughout the years. I want to take people back because you were, as much as you're a prolific investor now through Fund of Funds, you've had a career as a significant private equity investor, which we're going to talk about, and then we'll get to some of the even more exciting things you've done as an entrepreneur. But where were you before Grosvenor and before the customized funds platform, CFIG? Where were you before that?
Yeah. So I'm going to date myself. I've actually been in private equity for 35 years.
Okay.
That's private equity. That's not working. So again, I'm dating myself. That's specifically private equity. I started my private equity career when I joined Prudential. It was called then, the vehicle called Prudential Venture Capital.
Yep.
It was an $86 million fund, which was a large venture fund back then. This was now 35 years ago. Our claim to fame was we were the only venture money behind Dell Computer, Michael Dell. And then we raised a growth vehicle called Prudential Equity Investors. And then we raised a buyout fund, which was a $500 million fund. We renamed the firm Cornerstone. I went from, analyst, associate, VP, director to partner. It's where I cut my teeth. I was at that firm for 12 years, leaving as a partner. And the $500 million fund that I left was a large fund back then.
Yeah.
When I left it, but I learned I was a generalist. I was exposed to a range of industries, all kinds of entrepreneurs, the life cycle of a business, whether it was venture, growth, or buyout. So great training there. After 12 years, I decided I wanted to try to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. There were 9 partners at Prudential. And I went over to join a middle market focused private equity firm. I will say the first week that I was at Prudential, just to go back for a second, first week I was there, they sent me to the National Venture Capital Association annual meeting. There were 900 people in the room, and I was the only Black in the room.
Yeah.
And I had not thought about how underrepresented we were, just hadn't thought about it. And it was striking when I was in that room. And as I thought about the entrepreneurs that we were seeing coming in, that we were considering to invest behind, I just didn't see Black or brown people at all. And after about 4 or 5 years, I got invited to an NAIC small, I won't even call it a conference, a meeting, 30 people or so. And I fell in love with the organization because I couldn't believe there were 30 or 40 other people in this industry because I hadn't seen them. And it's been family for me since then and all these years.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I think a lot of us have our first NAIC story and what it was like to finally be, a peer amongst family, as opposed to, a paratrooper that jumped in behind enemy lines. But Derek, I sat in some of those early NAIC conferences for me. And one of the highlights during those early conferences was the depth at which we would explore deals. And you probably don't even know that I remember this, but I remember a deal that you did called Prestige Brands. And you probably haven't heard that name in a while. And I'll go out on a limb and tax your memory a little bit. But tell the audience what Prestige Brands was, like literally why you chose to invest in that company. And if you recall the outcome or whatever you can share, just tell us the Prestige Brand stories.
Yeah, sure. So when I left Cornerstone, I joined a firm called Encore Capital, and we were a middle market focused firm. And the deal that you're referring to is one where we decided, along with a couple other investors, to start a firm where we would go out and identify orphan brands. Mm-hmm. These are brands with tremendous brand equity in the marketplace, recognizable to consumers, but for whatever reason, either not significant to the parent company in terms of the revenue contribution or EBITDA contribution, or brands that were being milked and not reinvested in. We thought there was an opportunity to identify those brands, put them under different management, and grow them. And so as a great example of that, the first brand that we bought was Comet Cleanser. Mm-hmm. Now, Comet, everybody knows Comet. Comet is in one of 2 households under the sink in this country. The green canister, as you can visualize it, had not been changed. The color green had not been changed in 40 years. Mm-hmm. And we just did a different green hue. We added a lemon scented comment. It's kind of funny, but just simple things. I think orange was a popular color back then. We had an orange brand, and we took the brand and we expanded it somewhat into scrubs and some other things. And so we identified 4 other brands like that, orphaned for some of the same reasons, put them together, worked on the distribution, created a very cash generative business, and then sold it at a wonderful exit multiple. I don't even remember the multiple, Bob, and I know that everybody was happy, and I don't remember who we sold it to. I have to go back and look at it, but that was a great deal.
Yeah, it was a great deal, Derek. And some things that were interesting at that time, we didn't spend as much time back then as an industry talking about female-led firms and talking about women in the business. But as I recall, the CEO that you all backed to build this company was an extraordinary woman. I believe her name was Elise Donahue. And
That's correct.
Yep. So you partnered with her. I'm telling you, man, this was etched in my mind because I'm literally looking at the 4 or 5 brands that you all acquired. One of them was an eye drop. Another
Clear
was
Eyes.
Yep. Another was a mouthwash, a toothpaste, and you just took these old, outdated brands. You modernized the product color. You didn't change much of the product. Sometimes you changed delivery,
Right.
but it was extraordinary. And I thought then that was just an enormous deal. Frankly, a deal that could be done today. It really
That's
could.
right. No, absolutely. And so that was kind of a signature deal for me, at least, at Provender. And then after Provender, I started my own firm as a fundless sponsor called Encore Capital.
Yep.
And in that capacity, I was looking to do deals, raise money, not under the formality of a fund structure, but as a fundless sponsor.
Yeah.
And there was a deal that I worked on where I was introducing senior folks at Credit Suisse to consider an investment in a big consumer platform in Shanghai, China. And that led to 4 or 5 trips to China with the executives at Credit Suisse. The deal never got consummated, but coincidentally, at the same time, Kelly Williams and Mike Arpey, who co-headed the Customized Fund Investment Group, which was a private equity fund-to-funds practice at Credit Suisse, I think reached out to you and to our irrepressible chairman of NAIC, Joe Haslip, and asked for a recommendation on who they thought could come over and develop the diverse manager practice that they were interested in developing. And I thank you here publicly that you recommended me, and Joe also had good things to say about me. And that led to me having a meeting with Kelly and also with Mike Arpey. And I was hired in 2007 to focus on creating that practice, which I still lead today.
Well, I appreciate your generosity in including me, and I'll thank you on behalf of Joe for including us in the story. As you know, that's the deal that we all sign up for. We have all worked to support each other's careers. This is not an interview of me, but when somebody does interview me, I'll be able to tell all the stories about how you have helped my career. But I thank you. Without telling the stories, I thank you for the support and the loyalty and the friendship that you provided, as well as the leadership over the years. So Derek, now I want to pull you out of the private equity industry and even going to take you out of New York. I want to take you back to Cleveland, Ohio. And I want you to tell the audience what's relevant about Cleveland, Ohio, and where you got this passion for your people and fighting for what we often call the movement, but being supportive of people like us that don't always get champions. Why Cleveland, and where'd you learn this fighter spirit around supporting your people?
Well, why Cleveland is because my parents moved us to Cleveland when I was 3 years old, so that's why Cleveland. But I grew up in a suburb called Shaker Heights, which is an affluent suburb of Cleveland. At the time, it was known as one of the most successfully integrated suburbs in the country. My father was a doctor, a family doctor, but as I think back on it, he was a real Renaissance man. He was an avid hunter. He was an archer, a fisherman. He was an equestrian. We had a horse that he rode 2 to 3 times a week for many years. He practiced Kung Fu, got interested in Native American culture and wrote a book on the Sioux Indian and spoke a couple languages. So he was a man of many interests, hobbies, and talents. My mom was a stay-at-home mom by choice. I need to make that clear. I can hear her ringing in my ear here. She's passed. My father has passed as well. Stay-at-home mom. And then after me and my brothers went to college, she went back to school and ended up getting a PhD in Black Studies and ended up becoming a chair of the Black Studies department and the first African-American tenured professor at Oberlin College in 100 years. And she chaired the Black Studies department for 20 years. I have a twin brother, which you know, Bob. My twin, I think of him and still engage with him as a musician. He was a musician for 40 years. And if there's one word to describe for me, my first 20 years would be a musician for me, because I used to play with my brother constantly. He went on again for an extra 20 years. But he decided to go back to school and received a PhD in physics and re-entered the corporate world. I have a younger brother, Brian, who also was an incredible musician, but also after years of playing, decided to go back to school and received a master's in multimedia and re-entered the corporate world. My two grandmothers each had PhDs. My grandfather was a doctor who graduated from Howard University in 1925, and my other grandfather was a successful businessman who also was the mayor of his town. And so I say all that to say as context that that's the level of excellence that I grew up around. And so when I think back at how I grew up, obviously education was certainly important. And every time I left the house, I was representing the Jones family. I was representing the community, representing our race. And my parents are very clear about that. I would describe the upbringing as idyllic. More parties, very little drama. With that said, I grew up in the 60s, a time of civil unrest, a lot of racism and bigotry. And even though we were in one of the most successfully integrated neighborhoods in the country, our neighbors couldn't get over the fact that we moved next door to them. And every time we had a ball go into their yard, they'd call the police. And they never spoke to us. And we lived next door to them for 40 years. I have very vivid memories of me going on vacation with my parents, and we'd stay in pretty nice hotels, and we'd love to swim. And my parents created a game called Clear the Pool, because when me and my brothers would get in the water, they would time how quickly white people would get out of the water and leave the pool to ourselves.
Yeah.
Just imagine teaching your kids that game today.
Yep.
And then when I went to college, I secured a place. It was a nice place. I had two roommates that happened to be African American, and the three of us would stay and walk around, study in the place that we were renting, and people would see us, would call the police, assume that we were robbing the place. And the police came so often and so aggressive to our house that we literally put a pouch with our lease next to the door so we could hold it up to them and prove that we lived there. So I say all that to say that even though I had an idyllic upbringing, I was not immune to the racism and events that were going on and harassment from the police. My advocacy came from my parents.
Yeah.
My father was a very popular doctor, and he was serving the underserved Black community in Cleveland. And this was at a time when there were literally the riots. You may remember the Watts riots and the Newark riots. In Cleveland, they were called the Huff riots. And my father's office was on Huff Avenue, so it was on the main street of the riots. And he would take his Black doctor's bag and go down to either deliver a baby or visit with the patient. And we were unsure he was coming back. And this is a time where there were tanks going down the streets, Army soldiers, the Black Panther Party marching. And the Black Panther Party assigned an individual to protect my father's office, protect him, because they knew if anything happened to him, there would not be any health care. And literally every building burned on that street, but his office that only had 3 bullet holes was protected. So I had a different engagement, different experience with the Black Panther Party. Now, no question about it, I was scared to go visit my father because they were standing in the front with the machine gun. But it was a different engagement. And my mom was a leader in Cleveland. She was on the world board of the YWCA. She was the first African American in the Cleveland Museum of Art. And she was in the first of a lot of different things. And the two of them would constantly convene people in our house. We always had people in our house. We belonged to the International Big Brothers organization, so we always had a kid from another country staying with us. But one of my favorite meetings was when they curated a small group of people and invited Malcolm X to come to our house. And it was memorable. I was the coat check boy, which is an important job to make sure you collect the coats and the hats. But I remember meeting Malcolm, and he was an understated, very thin, wiry, not fiery physically person. He had a briefcase, and he came into our living room. And if you can visualize me and my brother sitting, on the top floor, looking down, trying to listen, he was there for about 3 hours, debating, talking, educating. He was bringing the United States suing the United States for human rights infringement. And of course, he was killed shortly thereafter. But I remember the FBI agents out on the front lawn writing down the license plates of all the attendees. And I say all that to say I grew up as a very self-aware individual. Every dinner, almost, it feels like to me, my mom was teaching us a Black studies history lesson, usually revolved around the Black woman, frankly. And so, but I grew up as very self-aware. And so that spirit of advocacy started then. And when I went to American University, I was one of the leaders of the Black Student Union.
Man, I really thank you for going into depth. I was trying to figure out how to ask you some of those questions. We had an opportunity years ago for me to talk about education and how important it was to my parents. And you shared with me at that time that you were 4th generation college. And, it was mind blowing, frankly, to just hear the journey. I'm glad you shared some of that here. But let's talk about American, because your family, you mentioned Oberlin, but your family had a strong tradition and connection to Fisk University. I know that your twin brother went there, and there was a lot of family encouragement to go to Fisk, but you somehow got to American, and you had a great career at American, but it's a different choice, and it ultimately was a better choice for you. Talk about American.
Yeah. So my parents did not want my brother and I to go to the same school because they wanted to make sure that we had our own separate identities. There was a lot of crossover in high school with friends and et cetera. And HBCUs was important. My parents went to Fisk, as you've cited. My twin went to Fisk. So I was destined to go to Howard.
Yeah.
I went to Washington, D.C., and I fell in love with the city. The city, you couldn't walk across the street at that time without disrupting a major demonstration. So you had to be politically aware. And I went on a tour of American after visiting Howard. The campus was beautiful. And it just so happened that they had the first set of Chinese exchange students visiting. And there was just an international student that was very enticing to me. So I decided to matriculate into American. And there I had developed a real interest in international business. I had a couple of, little entrepreneurial businesses while I was at school. But when I graduated, I studied economics. And when I graduated, I entered into a graduate program that took me to Europe to study the process of European integration and the formation of the European community. At that time, there were 12 countries. Today, there are 27 countries in the European community. But I then finished and came back to Cleveland and joined what then was the largest bank in Ohio, Ameritrust, and ended up on the international lending platform.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how I got to American. It was a wonderful experience. Now, many years later, I'm re-engaged with American on a campaign committee with the president of the school, and I'm also on the advisory board of the business school, trying to give back.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to talk about two more personal things for you, and then we'll get back to some of the questions that everybody wants to know about. But a lot of people don't know your history as an entrepreneur, and I won't burden you by getting you to tell all my favorite stories, but I do want you to tell a story about dessert and the role that you play, unique role that you play in bringing dessert to America, a specific one. I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'll let you tell the story. So tell us the dessert story, Derek.
Yeah, and I'll try and give you the short version because I could do the whole interview on that
Yep.
story. But while I was at Ameritrust in the international division, a childhood friend of mine, 21 years old, was at Goldman Sachs as the first year analyst, tasted a product called gelato in San Francisco, became obsessed with it, quit her job, flew to Italy, trained with a master gelatieri, came back, and then I helped her raise the capital to open the first authentic Italian gelateria in New York close to 40 years ago. And what was amazing about that was we raised all the money. It was close to $1 million at a time when $1 million was a lot of money. We raised all of it without anyone tasting the product, including myself. I had moved from Cleveland, helped build the store. She was the only one that tasted it. And fortunately, it opened to wide fanfare. It was rated the best ice cream in New York, the best gelato in the country. And so just highly ranked and just an onslaught of publicity. With that said, running a cash business is not easy. And we were robbed. I was personally robbed a couple of times. Our first employee was killed in one of our locations. And I had some run-ins with the mob. And so we had a very simple message, or simple, mission was to share this wonderful dessert product, and it became complicated. And again, I don't want to digress and go through that. But what it did do for me, though, was taught me a lot about business, taught me a lot about New Yorkers, because we were averaging 100,000 people a month. I ended up getting a scholarship at NYU for entrepreneurialism. And so that took me to the business school at NYU. And then it was a distinctive part of my resume, I'd like to believe, which helped me on the interviewing path, which I think helped me get a job at Prudential. And then while at Prudential, one of the industries that I did encourage the firm to get into, and I paid particular attention to, was the restaurant industry. And there, me with another partner really developed one of the preeminent restaurant practices in the country at that time. And the deal that really helped pave my way to partnership was a restaurant deal where we made close to $100 million. Again, that was a lot of money back then. But that was the experience. And again, on another interview, I can share a lot more about that. But the highs were very high, as Andy Warhol said to me, you were in your 15 minutes of fame, and the lows were pretty low as well.
Well, I appreciate you playing Uncle Derek for me and letting me cue up a few of my favorite stories. I do think that they're relevant because they color your experience and they help people understand both where the passion comes from for diverse managers, but also where the risk taking and the entrepreneurship comes from. So thank you for sharing those, Derek. We'll get back to our core questions. So Derek, you've used the term with me over the years that you swim in a sea of excellence. Talk to me a little bit about your experience in working with so many of these great managers, but also with some of the extraordinary people that you work with, at GCM Grosvenor. Talk to me about your existence in this sea of excellence as you describe it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say one of the real highlights, and again, I view it as an honor and a privilege to have the passion that I have at work, to work with the best of the best. We are in an industry where we are curating the best of the best, and there really is very little room on the diverse manager side for mediocrity. I would say that you see that in other areas, but we have to be better. And so I couldn't be more proud to engage with these talented women, people of color who've overcome all kinds of odds, watch them and get in early, because our position in the marketplace is to be early and impactful. Get in. When we look at where we've been in the first close of a first fund, those managers today manage $250 billion. And so it is kudos really to them. We've been lucky and fortunate to have really identified the talent that we think has been able to scale. And I can call off the names: Jose Feliciano, we're in the first close; Frank Baker, first investor; Sycamore, Stefan Kaluzny, first close; Robert, we started the practice with our first investment in the first institutional fund; Marty Nesbitt, on and on and on. We've been fortunate that way. And as I think I shared in the beginning of our discussion, clear sight on strategy, clear wheelhouse, strong culture, intense desire to be best of class at every facet of the business, always asking for information, because Grosvenor, we see everybody and everybody's returns. Strong training, just very thoughtful. And I've just watched and have been fortunate to see over the years that we've been helpful in some small way, that these managers continue to develop their business and really understand running the business of a business. And
Derek,
that's what.
Derek, I'm sorry to cut you off. Derek, talk to me a little bit about you. You, through education hours, could have a doctorate in emerging managers by now, right? Talk to me about all these annual meetings, the engagement with the partners. Talk to me about culture. People throw that word around a lot, but what is culture? What is most salient and observable about great cultures and the role that they have on the success of a firm?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture to me is, as I think of these firms, that everybody is aligned with the mission. There's an alignment with what that firm, what's the right deal, what's a Sycamore deal, what is a Vistria deal, what is a Vista deal. It's a very strong culture and understanding. It's a culture where here's a way that we like to process, we like to execute on these deals. Here are standard operating procedures that we have pattern recognition. If you execute on these, you're going to deliver superior results. It's a culture where people love being there. It's a culture where the attrition, and we've looked at it with the diverse managers, where the attrition is low. People want to be there. They can make money there. I think the culture has to be pretty clear in terms of how equity is distributed. And we've seen that over time. Many times these firms start with a strong personality, of course, who's taken all the risk, but over time that equity gets shared. If you're at any one of these firms, you feel like your money good, because there's just excellence over and over and over. The culture is one in which people believe that they are going to be with a firm that's going to continue to grow and provide them opportunities, and that there's the right level of training so that they can be successful in the firm. And so that's what I see.
Awesome. So, Derek, you sit in front of allocators all over the country, and frankly, you've done it on a global basis. What guidance do you have for allocators that want to expand their exposure to diverse managers?
I would say 3 or 4 things. One, that they need to devote the resources. They need to be serious. They need to be authentic. Grosvenor is authentic in its approach. We fundamentally believe that having a diversity of opinion, backgrounds, and experiences will lead to better outcome. That has been our experience, and that's how we proceed. Others would need to be authentic in their approach. Either devote the resources, like we have 9 people who are dedicated to focus on this demographic, and we've always had 8 or 9 people as a team, or hire specialists, hire someone like us or others in the marketplace. That's number 1. Number 2, it's important to have the heads of the various asset classes believe that as well, It can't just be top down, but people want that capital to be put aside, and in that capital, when that capital is deployed, there's a fight to get more money, to get redeployed. The asset class heads have to believe that this is going to be an additive and alpha generating practice, and they can find great managers that may transition for a larger allocation. I think the third thing is they have to be ready to redirect capital. You're taking money from this side that's always been over here and you're moving it to over here. You're moving it to a new manager. This manager may be okay and may feel comfortable, but we've got a new manager over here. So you've got to be open to change and to redirect money. And that's a power shift. It's power internally because people can be territorial about their clients and where they think the money's going to go. And you've got to make the argument, no, we're moving it from John to Johnston or something over here. Mm-hmm. And I think the fourth thing is to have a transition bucket, to keep the emerging managers. I hate the word graduate. Mm-hmm. It just has a wrong connotation to me. But there's needs to be a way, if you perform, to transition into a pool of capital where it's much greater, much bigger, and you're part of the direct allocation managers. And so too often, you're in the emerging manager bucket, you deliver results, but there's nowhere to go. And so I think you need that fourth element to be successful.
4 great insights. So you mentioned that you were a fundless sponsor, and you know the rocky and unstable journey that can be, but it still seems to be a great pathway for talented people to develop their independent track record and to assemble a team and show what they can do. Talk to us a little bit about the fundless sponsor world. But when or what are some of the indicators that let you know that you could actually be successful as a fund manager?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing more fundless sponsors because the fundraising period has become elongated. The macroeconomic conditions here, the denominator effect, the concern about the volatility in this country makes it hard. It's always hard anyway. I always say that when the times are good, everybody is raising money. When the times are bad, it's just hard, right? And so we're seeing managers who are trying to bring to life through their pipeline, here's what we would do with the money if you committed capital to us in this fund. And so I think about a firm like Red Arts, who were around. They were a fundless sponsor. I think they wanted to raise a fund, but the market said, you need to show us what you're doing. Their focus was on supply chain strategy, and they recruited some operators, they recruited executives, and we see that everywhere. You never know how fully integrated those operating executives really are. And they formed an SPV and did a deal in their quote wheelhouse. They sold it and got a 7x. They did a second deal in their wheelhouse and sold it, and I think it was a 7.5 times X. Mm-hmm. They proved out their thesis, and then they raised a $300 million fund. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes it just takes more work to show, that's how we can get engaged. We're showing you how we're doing, how we're evaluating risk. Here's a live deal right here. Another one that comes to mind is Fulcrum. Fulcrum manager that had a strategy as being certified as a minority business. I think one of the only, if not the only GP that has that certification, and an ability to leverage minority contracts with companies. And they had a very strong track record, one of the strongest pre-fund track records I've seen, where they were able to redirect a couple $100 million of revenues from Fortune 500 companies, created, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 jobs. And they were able to use that as a proof point that if they had a fund, they could be even more nimble and more efficient. And they ended up closing at their hard cap. So there's a lot of boxes to check. People often ask, what does it take? And maybe I'm getting ahead of you to aspire to be a fund manager. I can comment on that. Or people always ask me, if you want to be a fund manager, what does it take? It's a first-time fund. It is expensive. It is a realistic understanding that it's going to take you close to 2 years. Could take you close to 2 years to raise the money. And we've seen it's not only important for the principals to understand that, but it's important for their significant others to understand that they've left a great job where they're doing well, and they've decided to go on this journey where they're not going to make any money for 18 months, maybe 2 years. They're traveling at peak times to meet people like me and other allocators. And so it's not easy. So it's expensive. I would also say that you need to understand your track record and know whether your track record is even competitive. And if you're in a buyout strategy and you've not delivered a 20% return on whatever piece of the track record that you're showing, it's okay. You can still get funded, but you're not upper quartile. And you should know that. The track record should be explainable. We roll up our sleeves and can figure out attribution, but hopefully it's a track record that is consistent with the strategy that you've asked LPs to underwrite. You need to be thoughtful about the teammates. We've seen too often where you have someone who's joining because you went to business school together, and that person could be a great person, but are not additive to the strategy. Their track record's not additive. It's not helpful. It's now another person. It sounds cold, but it's not additive. It's the way I would think about it. So there are a lot of ingredients.
Derek, let me cue you on one, not to cut you off, but this is an important one that you've stressed many times before. Talk a little bit about integrity, things on your credit and your background check that, people think won't come out, and invariably the level of diligence that you guys do. You've gone, you've had scenarios where people just thought they would get by, and I'm not going to ask you the instance, but just talk a little bit about how comprehensive it truly is.
Yeah, I mean, it is. We do 20-year background checks, 20 years.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's fair. It's what the industry is driven to make sure. And so you're 20 years in, and it's much better practice. Best practice is to tell us what we're going to find, because we're going to find it. We're going to do it, whether it's a DWI or other things. And there are things, look, we all have made mistakes in college or coming out of college. And so, but what we look for is transparency. And we have found really amazing things. And I would say that most partners don't do background checks on their partners. It feels unnatural. And, I've known you for 15 years. We've been working, trying to work together. We finally decided to raise a fund. Now I'm going to do a background check on you. Mm-hmm. They don't do that, but we do it. And then we have to make the difficult call. Did you know, and I remember one example where a guy, he had a CFO that they had worked together. They were raising a fund. Well, the CFO was caught stealing a laptop in an airport. I mean, just kind of, and we called the other partner, and it just seemed crazy. He said, no, I knew. And actually we dug further, and there were 2 domestic abuse charges against that person. And so what you're doing, and this is just the world we live in, is all recorded, and it will be found. And it's been startling me. I called my kids, they're not in private equity, but what you do matters. Right. And we're in conversations about what a manager did 15 years ago. And we may get through it, but it comes up, and it is a consideration.
That's awesome. Thank you for that answer. So I'm going to touch on 2 more things in the 5 minutes we have left. One of them is going to be a personal opportunity for you to describe something you're involved with, and then the other will be a wrap up. But you volunteer and serve on the board of a major institution in Harlem. I know it's near and dear to you, and it's very important that the legacy of this institution remain active, and it's the Apollo. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with the Apollo and why you commit so much of your precious time to helping it?
Yeah, I think Apollo Theater is one of the most venerable brands in the country, standing for Black and Brown artistry. It could be, can be, is the Lincoln Center for Black and Brown artistry. And it is a brand, we talk about orphan brands, not orphan, it's a brand that is known, recognized around the world. If you're in China and Japan, you say the Apollo Theater, it will resonate. And there, to me, is an opportunity to take that brand and expand it beyond 1,500 seats on 125th Street, either through streaming or co-locating that brand. And so there is, I think, a wonderful opportunity also to have hopefully support from the private equity community to support the renovation and this significant history, which is 88 years now. And so I am privileged to be associated with this brand. I have a passion for music and entertainment, and there's new leadership there. It's a new chairman, Charles Phillips, who I think the world of, and a new CEO, et cetera. And so I'm looking forward to hopefully bringing some innovative ideas on how to export that brand globally.
Yeah. Well, Derek, you've been very generous with your time. You helped us understand where your passion for education and excellence came from, where your advocacy work started, and why you feel it so deeply in your heart. You talked to us about your career journey, the many things that you've achieved success at. You've shared with us the extraordinary platform that you've helped co-build with many other partners, but just the extraordinary success of Grosvenor and the vast reach that it's had. But Derek, as a close personal friend of yours, I would acknowledge to you that your legacy is going to be around helping people in this industry. With all the other success you've had, I think what I am most proud of, and I think what most people often say, is just how much you've dedicated yourself to helping people. So on behalf of all of those named and unnamed that you've helped, I'll give you a hearty thank you. Congratulations. It's not the end, but it's just been an extraordinary career. I want to give you an opportunity to say a final word.
Yeah, I thank you, Bob. And, I think there are two types of people. I tell my team this: helpful and non-helpful. And the way we run the practice is we want to be helpful. I want to be remembered as a helpful individual. I am surrounded by exceptional talent with my team in the field, out in the field. I think my parents would be impressed, expected, but impressed. And I like the phrase that I do live in a sea of excellence. I can't tell you the joy that I have when me or my team members come into our investment committee and recommend a diverse manager for an allocation. We feel that in some small way that we are contributing a little bit, just a little bit, to creating wealth and narrowing the racial wealth gap. I am so proud during those moments, and the level of excellence that I end up dealing with all day long. And certainly the people who even turn down are still excellent, but we're just in a business where the funnel is pretty narrow. These managers have a high propensity to take that wealth and circulate it back into the community. So there's kind of a circular motion. So again, it is a privilege and an honor. I want to thank you, all that you do, all that NAIC has done for me. I view you all as a safeguard family. I can't tell you what NAIC has meant to me through my career, and your leadership, your guidance. I view, one question you can ask me is, who are my mentors? I would consider you a mentor and Joe a mentor, ones who've helped me, with all kinds of career stuff. And usually you review all of my notes if I'm going to do anything publicly, except for this interview right here. And so thank you very much. I appreciate you. I appreciate NAIC. I am so glad to have done this interview with you.
Well, thank you, Derek. And we'll let that be the last word. But thank you so much for all that you've done for the industry and accretive to this cause, and wish you much and continued success. Thank you, Derek.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Bye.